The Columbus Blue Jackets did not win the 2025 draft lottery. We're not really surprised by that. What we are surprised by is that they actually moved down because math is dumb, but it's not the end of the world. We're going to talk about why that is on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. We're going to talk a little bit about the draft lottery today and how utterly unsurprised I am that the Blue Jackets did not win. And also a little bit how unsurprised I am that they ended up moving down because, of course, they did. Of course they did. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why it's not a big deal. And we're going to talk about what happens now. What are the likelihoods now that we know exactly where the Blue Jackets are drafting, and we know what Don Waddell's vague plan for the offseason is. So we'll talk a little about the draft lottery first. The Blue Jackets were not going to win first overall. The best they could do, I believe, was move up to third because you can only move up 10 spots max. So even if they'd won the draft lottery, they still would have ended up picking third. Wild that the Islanders won, by the way. I think the first time that anyone has moved up that much since like the Rangers did it to pick Lafreniere in that was the COVID draft, I think, 2020. And I believe that draft was immediately before they put the restrictions in about you can only move up 10 spots and you can only win twice in like the span of 5 years, right? But the Islanders win. The Utah Hockey Club, who I believe had the 14th overall pick, wins the second lottery, moves up to fourth overall. Because obviously, I'm gonna say that I genuinely don't believe that like the draft lottery is rigged, and I believe that for a couple of reasons. Mostly, I don't believe that they would have sent Connor McDavid to Edmonton in 2015. If the lottery was rigged, they would have sent him to Arizona. It kind of goes back to my feeling about officiating is that I don't think this league is competent enough to rig a draft lottery. I don't think this league is competent enough to rig its way out of a damn paper bag. So the lottery is not rigged. I do think it's very funny that the first draft that Utah will like really take part in is this one. And they get to, it's the first draft lottery that Utah takes part in, I believe. And they win the second draft lottery. They get to pick fourth overall instead of 14th overall because, of course. But the Blue Jackets, obviously, I think they had like Aaron Portstein tweeted the odds. Let me see if I can pull that up because the odds of the Blue Jackets moving down in the draft were so astronomically low. The Blue Jackets had a 4.2% chance of winning the lottery and jumping to number 3. Team behind the Blue Jackets wins the draw and pushes them back a spot. It came in at 5.1%. They had a 90% chance that they pick 13th overall. Of course, they jump back. Utah had a 3.2% chance of winning the lottery, and they did. So it's just another case, and I don't really buy into the fact that the Blue Jackets are cursed, or it's like what people call it, like the 614 tax or whatever. It's just bad luck. It's very funny that it keeps happening. It could be worse. I think about the Detroit Red Wings, who were absolutely miserable for like 2-3 seasons in a row, and kept getting shafted by the lottery, and they kept getting bumped down in the lottery. So like, it's not that bad. I also have been enjoying Chicago Blackhawks fans getting mad about getting bumped from second to third overall. Sucks, doesn't it? I have no sympathy for them. They did that to us. We got our guy anyway. Be mad about it. All of this to say, of course the Blue Jackets moved down in the draft, but moving from 13th to 14th overall is basically negligible. Like this draft specifically, the draft in general, like moving from 13th to 14th, you're not gonna like the cutoff point to get a good player is not 13th overall in basically any draft, right? And frankly, the cutoff to get a really good player in this draft is like 7. So even if the Blue Jackets had stayed where they were, like they're probably going to get to draft the player that they want to draft regardless, unless like Detroit decides to take the exact player that the Blue Jackets want at 13th overall. But even then, like Detroit would probably have still taken them at 12th overall. You know, like Utah moving up that much probably doesn't impact many teams. Like maybe Nashville, maybe whoever came after Nashville, Philadelphia, I think, or Boston, one of the two. No, not Boston. They're drafting 7th. It's Nashville is drafting 5th, and I think the Flyers are drafting 6th. But I could be wrong about that. I don't have the lottery odds in front of me right now. The point I'm making here, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second here, is picking 14th is materially the same as picking 13th. Is it like, does it suck to get bumped down? Sure. Is it annoying that Utah won the draft lottery when they, again, almost made the playoffs this year? Yeah, obviously. They didn't win the draft lottery, in fact. They won a draft lottery, obviously. The Islanders won the first one, the Utah Hockey Club won the second one. Is what it is, right? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't make a difference, I think, to Don Waddell's plans. I tweeted about it last night that I could see that the pick being 14th instead of 13th maybe makes it slightly more likely to be moved in a trade, if only because the likelihood of the player that you want going increases very, very slightly. But I also think that if the player that they want is available, they'll take it. If the player they don't want is available, they'll move it, right? I think it's more likely to be traded, but I think it's probably devalue, like it probably drops in value like a tiny bit because again, 14th overall and 13th overall, basically the same, right? It's not like the difference between, 3rd and 4th overall, for example, where there is or even 2nd and 3rd overall, where there is a pretty clear drop off in terms of talent, right? I'm thinking about last year where, there was your top 2, and then after that, there was a pretty clear drop off, right? And the top 2 for reference was Celebrini and Demidov, right? Anything after that, like there was a pretty clear drop off. Chicago beefed it and took Levshinov, whatever. We're not going to get into the Demidov of it all because the Blue Jackets might also have beefed it a little bit, but we're not talking about that today. The point I'm making here is this does not change things for the Blue Jackets. Like if they'd been bumped to 15th somehow, I still don't think it would have changed things, And I've seen a lot of fan bases getting like frustrated by getting moved down 2 spots. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins, for example, they got mad that they moved from 9th overall to 11th overall. And again, like it's basically negligible. This draft is really weird. It's very much, it does feel a lot like that 2020 draft where you've got kind of your handful of top end talent and then just a bunch of dudes, right? And like dudes are not bad. Dudes are good. But you could pick any of them between like 5 and 15, and you're probably going to be like, yeah, that makes sense for him to go there, right? So we'll talk a little bit about those players in a second here. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, I want to talk a little bit more about why this draft is so weird because it's not the same as the last handful of drafts. We'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I've got to tell you about wonderful pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. They're one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep you feeling fuller for longer. I love the no shells variety. I am a gremlin. I like to eat pistachios 14 at a time, and it's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days where I'm snacking at my desk or if I'm on a road trip or if I'm just hungry. I could just rip the packet open and basically pour it into my mouth raw. So they're my go-to. If you love cracking open every shell, though, for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking a little bit about the draft lottery. We talked a little bit about why it's not the end of the world that the Blue Jackets pick 14th instead of 13th. I wanted to cover like just a handful of players that the Blue Jackets could ostensibly take at their position. And again, shockingly, it is not that different to where they were 12 hours ago, right? The rankings are, for some reason, the NHL.com decides to rank the European skaters and the North American skaters separately, which is so stupid. And it makes me so annoyed because how do you compare first overall skater with a first overall North American skater with the first overall European skater, I should say. But I have pulled up Bob McKenzie's draft rankings. Now, I believe this is not a massively recent. This is his January ranking, so it's not going to take into account like late injuries. It's not going to take into account, for example, Brady Martin deciding to go Super Saiyan at the under 18s this month. But typically speaking, Bob McKenzie is the guy to go to in terms of draft rankings, right? Let me see if I can pull up his last year rankings to see how accurate they were real quick. But oh, it doesn't have them. Okay, that's fine. Let's go back to Bob McKenzie's 2025 ranking because there's a couple of players on here that I like a lot, and I'm interested to see where they go. Like, my number one guy is the I cling to the hope that Victor Eklund will drop all the way to 14th, and like that's simply not happening. Is the thing. It just is not. But he's my favorite kind of guy in the draft. Once you get out of that like top two, because for my money, Matthew Schaefer and Michael Bisa are the top two. Like, I would go Schaefer because I like him better, but Misa going first overall wouldn't shock me at all. That might make some noise for James Hagan's going first overall now that the Islanders have won, considering he is a Long Island kid. But in terms of the Blue Jackets, so Victor Eklund is currently ranked 8th overall. So again, if Bob McKenzie has him 8th, he's probably going around 8th. He currently has, and again, this is the January rankings, so it's not gonna be like this. But he has Lyndon Lakovich of the Moose Jaw Warriors going 14th overall to the Blue Jackets. They had 58 points in 47 games with the Moose Jaw Warriors. Blue Jackets have had success drafting from the WHL the past handful of years. They've had success drafting from the Moose Jaw Warriors, in fact. And then the guys surrounding him, Brady Martin, who I just mentioned, is probably going to get bumped way up because of his U18's performance, which is like, you can do that. That's fine. Carter Bear comes in at 15th of the Everett Silvertips. Malcolm Spence of the Erie Otters, who we talked about with Tony Ferrari last week, a couple of weeks ago. All forwards, Sean Aitchison, who we talked about, is currently ranked 18th. He's a defenseman. And then Blake Fiddler, who's another guy that we talked about, is ranked 21st defenseman. Another guy, Colin Potter, currently ranked 20th. Like, there's a lot of players in this kind of, let's say, 12 to 20 range. The Blue Jackets are currently drafting 14th and 20th. We'll talk about how likely they are to make both those picks in a second here, but you're not going to get like a game-breaking player at this point in the draft. Again, this draft is really weird because I feel like last year there was a lot of like, okay, well, or maybe not last year. Last year was also kind of a little bit weird because no one really seemed to know what to do. Let's go to the draft before that, where there was, there was that a solid top two slash top three, and then there was like between like 4 and 12. I feel like there was an incredible player to get there. This year, it's kind of similar. There's that top two, the Schaefer Bisa, and then there's like that second tier of Hagens, Martone. Personally speaking, Victor Eklund goes in that tier as well. And then after that, it's kind of a drop off. You've got like Anton Frondel, you've got Caleb Denoyer, you've got Roger McQueen, like who is he's this year's Caden Lindstrom of probably should be in the conversation, but he got injured real early and he only played 17 games. But we'll talk, we don't talk about Roger McQueen because the Blue Jackets are not going to draft him. He's not going to be there. Once you get into kind of, let's say, 7th overall, you could draft anyone 7th and you could draft anyone kind of 27th, I feel like. And there would not be a huge, like, I wouldn't be shocked, for example, if Sasha Boumedienne goes 7th overall. Again, he had a great under 18s tournament for Sweden. I believe set the record for most points out of a U18 tournament by a defenseman. Struggled a little bit playing at Boston University this season as a 17-year-old, which again makes a ton of sense. But like he's your 7th overall. He's currently ranked 24th on Mackenzie's rankings, but I wouldn't be shocked. There's a goalie ranked 28th overall. I wouldn't be surprised if he moves up. Joshua Ravensbergen. People are already talking about him as a potential for the 20th overall pick for the Blue Jackets. But the point I'm making here is instead of just kind of throwing a bunch of names out into the universe, there are a ton of good players, right? It is so unlikely that, and again, so let's go back to the kind of that chunk of players that I named: Brady Martin, Lyndon Lakovich, Carter Bear, Malcolm Spence, Sean Aitchison, Colin Potter, Blake Fiddler. Those 7 guys are not all going to be gone by the time they get to 14th. Now, is any of those guys the ones that the Blue Jackets are going to want? Potentially, but instead, what I think is going to happen, and what we'll talk about in a minute, is I don't think the Blue Jackets pick in the first round of this draft. Or if they do, I think they're going to pick later. And we'll talk about that in just a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets.
An award-winning mattress can change your life. I speak from experience. It happened to me. After years of uncomfortable sleeps, I recently switched to Bear Mattress, and the results were instant. Bear Mattress is designed with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. I used to deal with night sweats, but Bear's best-in-class cooling ensures optimal temperature regulation, which prevents overheating and helps me stay comfortable all night long. Bear offers a wide variety of mattresses, but to get the right one for you, take their sleep quiz that matches you to your perfect mattress based on body type and sleep preferences. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout to get 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com. Use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked a little bit about the draft lottery. We've talked a little bit about like the players that are potentially going to be available for the Blue Jackets 14th overall. But now we're going to talk about what I think happened, which is I think the Blue Jackets moved both of these first round picks. Maybe not in the same draft, like in the same trade, maybe not in like at the same time. I could very much see a world where they trade like 20th for like, I don't know, 29th overall, just throwing a number out there, and getting an asset. Or I could see, I basically, my thought is I think they're going to trade back in the draft. And I think they're going to go for a big name in the trade sphere as well, and I don't know who that big name is necessarily. I don't know who's going to be tempted by 14th overall, like ostensibly Buffalo. Maybe. I know that a couple of people are really high on Alex Tuck and Bo Byram as targets for the Blue Jackets. I also think Owen Power, who is apparently on the outs in Buffalo, would be a great pickup, and I would absolutely do like. Honestly, I'd probably do 14th and 20th overall for Owen Power. I like him a lot, and I think he would be a fantastic partner for Denton Matejchuk. Again, we're going to keep discussing the defense problem because I still don't know what Darwin's plan is there in terms of he wants to rehaul the defense, but also he wants to keep Fabro and he wants to keep Provorov, but also he wants the defense to look different next year. And there's just anyway. The closer we get, the more I'm like convincing myself that he's just going to sign Provorov to like a 7x7. Like Provorov's going to get the Neil Pionk contract. It's going to age so badly, and we'll see. But the point I'm making here is, and I talked about this a little bit with Will Scouch of Scouching fame. We're going to have him on the show at some point in the next couple of weeks, probably to talk about the draft lottery. And basically, I was like, okay, the picking 40, like 30, I said 13th and 21st, I think at the time, because the Blues were not yet eliminated and the draft lottery hadn't happened. I was like, okay, they're picking 13th and 21st overall. What is there a winger for Adam Fantilli in there? Like, who should they target at those positions, right? And so he came up with, Colin Potter. He talked a little bit about Leonard Lakovic, like mentioned some good names, but he also said you are not going to, like, the Blue Jackets as they are currently constructed, the Blue Jackets where they are in their timeline right now, should not be looking at the 2025 draft to find a winger for Adam Fantilli, right? That is a guy that you go out and find in free agency. That is a guy that you find in a trade, right? And whether that ends up being Nikolai Ehlers, who he talks about at length, which again I would be way more than okay with. Whether the Mitch Marner of it all, whether you go out and get Brock Besser, like whether you get Alex Tuck in a trade, for example, like I agree, you're not going to find a winger for Adam Fantilli in the 2025 draft, at least not one that fits the timeline, right? If you were drafting James Hagens, for example, or Michael Misa, or even a guy like Victor Eklund, I think has extreme upper, like, potential top line, definitely top 6 potential, like, and will probably be ready sooner than you think. If you pick a winger now, it's probably going to be 2-3 years before they're ready to be impact players. So does it make more sense to just get rid of the picks? Trade the picks, at least one of them, get a winger for Adam Fantilli. Again, the defense we'll figure out the defense at a later date. Like, for me anyway, the big question right now is filling that second left wing spot. Whether they fill that with a guy out of training camp, whether they fill that with a guy out of free agency, out of a trade, whatever, they're not going to do it in the 2025 draft, right? So, on the one hand, I am generally not a fan of trading first round picks necessarily, like return dependent, right? Like sometimes I understand that's what it takes. But I think a team that is still building, like the Blue Jackets are, I am wary of trading first round picks. However, this is a weak draft, and the Blue Jackets, I think, are in that weird space where they're not bad enough to pick in the lottery, but a lottery pick would probably be the most helpful for them, right? Which is why, like, Utah picking 4th overall is kind of perfect. The Islanders picking 1st overall is incredible, right? Like, if the Blue Jackets could have, like, snuck into the top 5 of the draft somehow, which they would have picked 3rd, or I think they would have only picked 3rd overall, or potentially 4th overall if 11th or 12th place had won the lottery and the Blue Jackets won 2nd, I think is how it would have worked. But like if the Blue Jackets could have managed to sneak another 3rd overall pick in there, and again picked up someone like Hagens or Eklund, yes. But right now, I don't know that keeping hold of these first round picks and, continuing to stock the cupboard is the move for this team. On the flip side, they're in a weird place right now, and you can never have enough good prospects, right? And eventually you're going to get to a point, like, in theory anyway, you're going to get to a point of a team like Tampa Bay, for example, or a team like Colorado, who have drafted well, but have also not drafted a lot. And that's because they win, and that's because they trade a lot of picks, right? Or if they do draft those players, like Cal Ritchie, for example, they get traded for the deadline, right? Look at the Isaac Howard for the Tampa Bay Lightning, who is a guy that I really think the Blue Jackets should focus on trying to acquire. Honestly, I think you could. I don't even think that you would have to throw 20th overall at the Lightning to get that. I think you could probably throw a second rounder at the Lightning and potentially get that done. But that's another episode. I don't think it helps the Blue Jackets, just to kind of round up and go back to my original point. I don't think it helps the Blue Jackets to pick 14th overall this season. It wouldn't have helped them to pick 13th overall either. So this is not like losing the lottery. Like, it's not getting moved back in the lottery was bad. Winning would have helped, but losing is not the end of the world, right? You can do stuff with those picks. I think you have to be careful with what you do with those picks, right? Like, there's no point trading both of your first overall picks for a guy that is, 35 years old, for example. Or, I think using those picks to create cap space to, sign someone who's 30 years old to an 8-year contract. And not that I think that they would do that, but I think about the fact that they traded a third-round pick to get 8 years of Damon Severson instead of 7 years of Damon Severson, right? But it is what it is. To wrap up, losing the draft lottery sucked. Would have been fun. Not the end of the world. I do think now this makes it more likely that at least one of the Blue Jackets' first-round picks moves. I don't know where. I don't know what for. We'll probably get more of an idea closer to the time. I do still think it's very interesting that the Blue Jackets organization immediately stopped leaking information as soon as Kekalainen was out. Do I think that he was the source of the leak? Not necessarily, but I do think Don Waddell keeps a tighter lid on things than Kekalainen does. So we might not know until we know, right? I'm trying to think if anything happened over the past year or so that sources are saying that the Blue Jackets are doing this or the Blue Jackets are doing that, right? I know there was a story that the Utah Hockey Club had reached out about Provorov, and the Blue Jackets said no. Or there was the noise about Mathieu Olivier's new contract for weeks, basically. There was that's about it. We're not seeing all of these stories about so-and-so being on the block, or the Blue Jackets are pursuing so-and-so hard, right? And I don't think it was Kekalainen leaking these things to the media, but I do think Don Waddell runs a tighter ship than Kekalainen. So we might not know what's happening until it happens. But we've got some time till the draft. I think we got, 6-7 weeks to the draft? It's usually the end of June, right? The 2025 entry-level draft is on June 27 and June 28th. So, yeah, it's about 7 weeks away. So we've got plenty of time to speculate, plenty of time for Don Waddell to make his moves then. But we'll keep talking about it because it's fun to speculate, right? So that's kind of what I've got for today. Tomorrow, I do finally want to talk about the World Championships. And Team Canada specifically, and also Zach Werenski is there now, so I guess we'll talk about him as well. So the Blue Jackets, I believe that's 4 people that have gone to Worlds so far. Zach Werenski for Team USA, Dean Everson, Ken Johnson, Adam Fantilli for Team Canada. I don't think anyone else has gone. There would almost certainly be Russians there if Russians were allowed, but they're not. And that's the bulk of the Blue Jackets is Canadians, Americans, and Russians right now. They've gone from being almost entirely Finnish and American to heavily Canadian and Russian, which is fine. But we'll talk about that tomorrow, unless the Blue Jackets do something else. But until then, thank you for listening, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _JacobFoster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.